It is currently thought that Earth formed 4.6 billion years ago. In fact, it's thought that the entire solar system was born approximately at the same time. You might wonder, how can we date something like this? Well, whenever a rock is created, certain elements start to change from one isotope to another, or it can be changed from one element to another in what is known as radioactive decay. And the radioactive decay of chemicals happens with astounding regularity. So we can compare the percentages of one element to another. The most common way geologists date rocks relies on the breakdown of potassium to argon. In igneous rocks, that's rocks that are formed by volcanic activity, the potassium argon clock is set the moment the rock first crystallizes from magma. Precise measurements of the amount of phosphorus relative to argon in an igneous rock can tell us the amount of time that has passed since the rock crystallized. Meteorites that fall to the Earth's surface have been measured this way, comparing the precise amounts of phosphorus and argon. Nearly every meteorite measured indicates that they are 4.6 billion years old. This suggests that our solar system was born in a single event. Meteorites are fragments of that event that are zipping around in space. So what is the oldest Earth rock? That distinction belongs to a rock from northern Quebec in Canada. It was measured to be approximately 4.0 billion years old. So why haven't we found any Earth rocks that are 4.6 billion years old? The reason is that the geological forces of Earth are unrelenting. Rocks are constantly being recycled through melting and compression, so it's a surprise that we have anything as old as 4 billion years at all. Geologists measure time on Earth in three major categories. The biggest are eons, and there are only two, the Precambrian and the Phanerozoic. The Precambrian is when life was absent from Earth except in the most simplest forms. The Phanerozoic begins with an explosion of diversification in different types of species known as the Cambrian explosion and continues to this very day. Eras are segments of the eons. In the Phanerozoic, we have the Paleozoic, the Mesozoic, and our era, the Cenozoic. And each of those eras are broken up to smaller, bite-sized chunks known as periods. We live in the Quaternary period, and you may have heard of the Jurassic period. That's when dinosaurs roamed the Earth. The Precambrian Eon occupies most of geological time. In fact, of the 4.6 billion years of Earth's time, it occupies over 4 billion of those years. In terms of life, not a lot was going on, but it was. That's when the first life form came to be. We have no idea what the first form really looked like or exactly when it came onto stage, but it's most certainly unicellular in an environment that was almost completely devoid of any oxygen. From 4.6 to 3.8 billion years ago, the Earth experienced a massive bombardment of enormous asteroids due to its gravitational effect. Now imagine a volcano. Now imagine the whole Earth as one giant volcano getting pummeled with asteroids the size of the Rocky Mountains, day in and day out. That's what the Earth was like. And it was known as the Hadean Era. Hadean refers to the Greek word for hell, Hades. Also within the Hadean Eon, a small planet approximately a quarter the size of the Earth was orbiting the Sun in a wildly elliptical orbit. And it struck the Earth, taking a huge bite out of it, making the Earth look like the Death Star. Just like a car collision, the impact slowed the speed of the Moon and bounced off the Earth. It then got caught in the gravitational attraction from the mass of the Earth and is forever caught in an orbit around the Earth. Within the Hadean Eon, liquid water first appeared on Earth. Liquid water comes from volcanic processes, even today. So imagine the entire Earth as a volcano system spewing out steam over millions and millions of years. Once the water rose above the rocks, it tended to stay there, creating Earth's oceans, making it the blue planet. Although we have no direct evidence, it is hypothesized that Mars experienced a similar fate, and very likely was our solar system's other blue planet. Did life emerge there? We may never know for sure. The Hadean Eon is capped with the ending of major bombardment of extraplanetary bodies as the solar system takes its adolescent form. Asteroids still rain down on Earth, but it's really quite rare compared with the Hadean Eon. In fact, asteroids still rain down on Earth to this day, but they're usually the size of golf balls or even basketballs not the size of the Rocky Mountains. During the Archean Eon, we have the first evidence of life. Carbon occurs in three varieties: carbon-12, carbon-13, and carbon-14. Normal carbon has 6 protons and 6 neutrons and is called carbon-12. However, carbon may have 1 or 2 extra neutrons, creating carbon-13 or carbon-14. Atoms with the same number of protons but different number of neutrons are called isotopes. When organisms ingest carbon, they preferentially use carbon-12 over carbon-13. Carbon-14 is radioactive and thus won't remain over a very long time period. Carbon with a high ratio of carbon-12 to carbon-13 is therefore a good indicator of living processes. Carbon enriched in carbon-12 has been identified in rocks from Greenland dated at 3.85 billion years ago. This is the earliest evidence for life on Earth. The first physical evidence we have of life on Earth are stromatolites. Stromatolites are structures created by photosynthetic bacteria, prokaryotes. These rounded, bulbous shapes are usually less than 1 meter across and contain fine layering. The earliest known fossils of stromatolites are dated at 3.45 billion years ago and come from Western Australia. Ironically, the highly saline bays of Western Australia are one of the few places in the world today where living stromatolites exist. Well, we've come to the end of the Archean Eon, and the Proterozoic Eon is defined when cyanobacteria come to the stage. And the presence of cyanobacteria was a game changer. They consumed carbon dioxide and metabolized it, producing the byproduct oxygen, using anaerobic cellular respiration. In anaerobic cellular respiration, glucose is broken down and creates 2 ATP, the universal currency of energy for all of life's functions. In contrast, aerobic respiration breaks down the same molecule of glucose and synthesizes 32 ATP. That's an efficiency 16 times greater. However, it took some evolutionary time for this more efficient machinery to come to the forefront. Throughout the Proterozoic, the levels of oxygen in rocks increased, indicating higher and higher abundances of organisms that were going through cellular respiration. Eukaryotic organisms also first appeared in the Proterozoic Eon. Remember, prokaryotes are defined as cells that lack a nucleus, whereas eukaryotes are defined as cells with a nucleus, and they typically have many organelles. Mitochondria and chloroplasts are 2 organelles that convert energy from one form to another. Chloroplasts, which are found in the cells of plants and algae, use the energy of the sun to build carbohydrates. Mitochondria, which are found in virtually all eukaryotic cells, use the energy in organic molecules to make ATP, the cell's energy currency. How did these specialized compartments arise during the evolution of eukaryotic cells? Prokaryotes lack these compartments. Biologists theorize that mitochondria and chloroplasts are probably descendants of primitive prokaryotes that were engulfed by the ancestors of eukaryotic cells. And if that wasn't enough, the Proterozoic Eon was the first sexual revolution. Sex was here and it wasn't going anywhere. The first sexual structures that we have evidence of exist in red algae. These were distinct tissues that were differentiated and fundamentally different than the vegetative structures that made food for the plant via photosynthesis. This is the first time new organisms were born by a process other than asexual reproduction. The end of the Proterozoic Eon is marked by the complete oxygenation of the oceans. Before photosynthetic organisms came onto the stage, there were virtually no oxygen gas in the oceans. Organisms at this time, quote unquote, breathed carbon dioxide via anaerobic respiration. Recall, anaerobic respiration creates a net of 2 ATP, whereas aerobic respiration nets 32 ATP. The increased production of oxygen in the water provided the raw ingredients for much abundance of the global biomass. And that's exactly what happened. And that is what marks an end of the Proterozoic Eon. The Phanerozoic Eon begins with the Paleozoic Era and is marked by one of the most radical speciation events in the history of life on Earth. This event is known as the Cambrian explosion. also known as the Cambrian radiation. At this time, nearly all of the major groups of plants, animals, and fungi appeared, and this is where life transitioned from an entirely aquatic phenomenon to a terrestrial one. The Cambrian explosion was the fastest radiation of speciation in the history of life on Earth. Darwin really struggled to explain this phenomenon in terms of natural selection. His main premise was descent with modification. He thought that species changed through time gradually in incremental steps. The Cambrian explosion threw this idea square on its head. In the 1970s, two researchers named Niles Eldridge and Jay Gould came up with an alternative hypothesis. They argued that evolution has long periods of stasis, or really stable periods, in which not a lot of evolution occurs, and that they're punctuated by these short periods of rapid change, and this is known as the punctuated equilibrium hypothesis. There are several possible causes of the Cambrian explosion. The most likely is that the oceans as well as the atmosphere was saturated with oxygen, and that aerobic respiration had very likely evolved. Organisms that are 16 times more efficient at producing energy have a huge evolutionary advantage, and competition for resources becomes a dominating evolutionary force. Mix that with the fact that these same species are mixing their DNA in a gene pool blender every single generation through sex, then you have a recipe for rapid evolution. While it is likely that competition had a direct effect on the speciation of Cambrian organisms, the origin of predation instituted a new evolutionary force. Organisms didn't have to make their own energy anymore, they could just steal someone else's. So when predation came to the stage, there was a selection pressure for prey to evolve defensive capabilities such as speed or armor. But there was also selection pressure for the predators to be able to overcome those evolved mechanisms in their prey by being stronger, faster, or more lethal. This was the beginning of the natural arms race, which has been a dominant evolutionary mechanism since its inception. It is also thought that the mutations that led to more complex and organized body plans laid the foundation for the evolutionary innovation to occur. This is like Henry Ford developing a method for producing cars quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. The groundwork was paid for other entrepreneurs to adopt that system and create a whole suite of different cars from Ferraris to Priuses. There are three caches of fossils that represent animal diversification between the Precambrian and Cambrian era. More than 500 million years old, the fossils of the Burgess Shale preserve an intriguing glimpse into the early life on Earth. They were first discovered in 1909 by Charles Walcott, then Secretary of the Smithsonian Institution in the Canadian Rockies of British Columbia. These fossils were in an underwater avalanche of fine mud that preserved exceptionally fine details of the structure of their soft parts. Only hard parts are preserved in most other Cambrian deposits, obviously limiting information within that geological record. Many of them appear to be early ancestors of higher forms, from algae to the chordates, a major group of animals that include humans and primates. Others appear unrelated to any living forms, and the disappearance of them presents an intriguing mystery. But what is most interesting about the Burgess Shale is that it is the first indication of increased size and complexity of animal species. And not only that, nearly every major animal group that exists on Earth today and that has ever existed on Earth was born during this time. It has been known since 1868 that fossils were present in the Ediacara Hills of Australia. This biota consists of enigmatic, tubular, and frond-shaped, mostly sessile organisms which lived during the Ediacaran period. Trace fossils of these organisms have been found worldwide and represent the earliest known complex multicellular organisms. The Ediacara biota radiated in an event called the Avalon Explosion 575 million years ago, after the Earth had thawed from the cryogenic period's extensive glaciation, and largely disappeared contemporaneously with the rapid appearance of biodiversity known as the Cambrian explosion. Most current existing body plans of animals first appeared only in the fossil record of the Cambrian rather than the Ediacaran. For macroorganisms, the Cambrian biota completely replaced the organisms that populated the Ediacara fossil record. Multiple hypotheses exist to explain the disappearance of this biota, including a changing environment, the advent of predators, and competition from other life forms. The Doshantou Formation of China is notable for being one of the oldest fossil beds to contain highly preserved fossils, and it occurred approximately 50 million years before the Cambrian explosion. Doshantou fossils are all aquatic, microscopic, and preserved to a great degree of detail. The latter two characteristics mean that the structure of the organisms can be studied at the cellular level, and considerable insight has been gained into the embryonic and larval stages of many early creatures. One contentious claim is that many of the fossils show signs of bilateral symmetry, a common feature in many modern-day animals, which is usually assumed to evolve later during the Cambrian explosion. A nearly microscopic fossil animal was announced in October 2005 with the claim that it was the oldest known bilateral animal. However, the absence of adult forms of almost all animal types in the Doshantou makes these claims difficult to prove. The Paleozoic era came to a dramatic conclusion with the Permian-Triassic extinction, in which nearly all the multicellular life on Earth ceased to exist. It was the largest extinction event in Earth's history, in which 96% of the marine species ceased to exist and over 70% of the terrestrial species ceased to exist. Researchers have variously suggested that there are from 1 to 3 distinct pulses or phases of extinction. There are several proposed mechanisms for these extinctions. The earlier phase was likely due to gradual environmental change, while the latter phase has been argued to be due to a catastrophic event. Suggested mechanisms for the latter include large or multiple impact events, increased volcanism, coal or gas fires and explosions from the Siberian traps, and a sudden release of methane from the sea floor. Gradual changes include sea level change, anoxia, and increasing aridity, and a shift in the ocean circulation driven by climate change. Also at this time, all of the land masses that we know today as the continents were combined into one supercontinent known as Pangaea. It is hypothesized that since all the continents were together, there was a significantly decreased shoreline, and nearly all the animals that existed on Earth were aquatic animals, and nearly all the aquatic animals existed near the shore. So a decreased shoreline, you have decreased habitat with which these animals could exist. The Triassic began in the wake of the Permian-Triassic extinction event, which left the Earth's biosphere impoverished. The early half of the Triassic period witnessed life's slow recovery, while the latter half is characterized by the Archosaur's rise to dominance. Dinosaurs didn't actually become dominant until the Jurassic. The first true mammals also evolved during the Triassic, as well as the first flying vertebrates, the pterosaurs. The vast supercontinent of Pangaea existed until the mid-Triassic, after which it began to gradually rift into two separate landmasses, Laurasia to the north and Gondwana to the south. The global climate in the Triassic was mostly hot and dry, but the Earth became cooler and wetter as Pangaea drifted apart. This created more coastlines and caused a change in global climate from hot and dry to warm and humid, and many of the arid deserts of the Triassic were replaced by lush rainforest. The dinosaurs continued to dominate the land and reached their peak in this period as they diversified into a wide variety of groups, ranging from carnivorous theropods to the massive herbivorous sauropods. Marine reptiles such as Astictiosaurus and Pliosaurus ruled the ocean, while pterosaurs, the flying reptiles that were the first airborne vertebrates, took to the sky. The Cretaceous was a period with a relatively warm climate and high sea levels. The ocean and seas were populated with now extinct marine reptiles, ammonites and rudists, and the land by dinosaurs. At the same time, new groups of mammals and birds as well as the flowering plants appeared. The Cretaceous ended with one of the largest mass extinction events in Earth's history, the KT extinction, when many species, including non-avian dinosaurs, pterosaurs, and large marine reptiles, disappeared. The Cretaceous Paleogene extinction event, formerly known and still commonly referred to as the Cretaceous Tertiary extinction event, occurred approximately 65 million years ago. It was the large-scale mass extinction of plant and animal species in a geologically short period of time. Widely known as the KT extinction event, it is commonly associated with a geological signature known as the KT boundary, usually a thin band of sediment found in various parts of the world. K is the traditional abbreviation for the Cretaceous period, derived from the German Kreidezeit, and T is the abbreviation for the Tertiary period, a historical name for the period of time now covered by the Paleogene and Neogene periods. The event marks the end of the Mesozoic Era and the beginning of the Cenozoic Era. Scientists theorize that the KT extinctions were caused by one or more catastrophic events such as a massive asteroid impact or increased volcanic activity. Several impact craters and massive volcanic activity such as the Deccan Traps have been dated to the approximate time of the extinction events. These geological events may have reduced sunlight and hindered photosynthesis, leading to a massive disruption in Earth's ecology. Many researchers believe the extinction was more gradual, resulting from a combination of the events above, and others including sea level change and climate. The Cenozoic Era is the current and most recent of the three Phanerozoic geological eras, and covers the period from 65 million years ago to the present. It is also known as the Age of Mammals, because the extinction of non-avian dinosaurs allowed them to greatly diversify and dominate the Earth. The era is ongoing, and it is divided into three periods: the Paleogene, the Neogene, and our period, the Quaternary. During the Cenozoic, mammals diverged from a few small, simple, generalized form into a diverse collection of terrestrial, marine, and flying animals, giving this period its other name, the Age of Mammals, despite the fact that birds still outnumbered mammals 2 to 1. The Cenozoic is just as much the age of the savannas, the age of the codependent flowering plants and insects, and the age of birds. Grass also played a very important role in this era, shaping the evolution of the birds and mammals that fed on it. One group that diversified significantly in the Cenozoic were snakes. Evolving in the Cenozoic, a variety of snakes increased tremendously following the evolution of their current primary prey source, the rodents. In the early part of the Cenozoic, the world was dominated by birds, terrestrial crocodiles, and a handful of primitive large mammal groups. But as the forest began to recede and the climate began to cool, other mammals took over. The Cenozoic is full of mammals both strange and familiar, including whales, giant sloths, saber-toothed cats, mastodons, mammoths, three-toed horses, and giant rhinoceroses.